Defenseless old woman robbed by gang, but Ronaldo saves the day. The streets of Lisbon were quiet as the sun began its slow descent, casting golden light over the cobbled pathways. The day had been long, and Maria's tired feet ached with each careful step. She clutched her small purse tightly to her chest, not out of fear, but out of habit. She had lived in this city for over 70 years. She had seen its beauty, its changes, its kindness, and its cruelty. The streets that once felt safe now held a different weight, one she couldn't quite name. Maria had never been rich, but she had always been independent. She lived alone in a small apartment above a bakery, her days filled with routine, visits to the market, quiet afternoons on her balcony, small conversations with the shopkeepers who had known her for decades. But lately, the world had started to feel colder. People rushed past her without a second glance. Strangers no longer offered help when she struggled with her bags. She had become something that the city had learned to ignore. Tonight, as she walked home from the pharmacy, a slight chill in the air, she felt it again, that unease. A presence. A shadow moving in step with her own. Maria's grip tightened on her purse as her breath quickened. She didn't turn around. She had learned long ago that fear only made them stronger. Then, a voice. Boa noite, Avu. She stopped. The voice was too close, dripping with something that made her stomach churn. Slowly, she turned. 3 men stood behind her. Young, faces half hidden under hooded sweatshirts, their eyes too sharp, their smiles too easy. Maria felt her pulse pound in her ears. She took a small step back. Please. I don't have much. The tallest of the 3, a man with a thin scar running down his cheek, laughed. That's not for you to decide. His hand shot out, grabbing the strap of her purse. Maria held on. Her body was old, but her spirit was not weak. Let go, she gasped, pulling back with everything she had. Another man, broader, meaner looking, shoved her. Maria stumbled, her frail body hitting the cold pavement. The shock of it sent pain through her knees, through her hands as they scraped against the rough stone. The purse was ripped from her grasp. She watched helplessly as the men rummaged through it, laughing at the crumpled bills, tossing aside her receipts, her house keys, her photograph. A small, faded picture of her husband, the only one she had left of him. The man with the scar picked it up, sneering. What's this? Maria reached for it, her voice breaking. Please, don't. He ripped it in half. Something inside Maria shattered. She didn't care about the money. She didn't care about the purse. But this. This was something she could never get back. Her hands trembled as she tried to pick up the torn pieces, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. The men laughed, their amusement sharp, merciless. Then, one of them kicked over her bag, sending the last of her belongings scattering into the street. They turned to leave, their voices careless, victorious. And then. They stopped. The laughter died. Maria, still on the ground, clutching the torn photograph in her hands, felt it too. A shift in the air. A presence. A new voice cut through the silence. Low. Calm. Unshakable. Pick it up. Maria looked up. And so did they. Standing just a few feet away, framed by the dim glow of the streetlights, was a man. Tall. Powerful. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark, cold, piercing, were locked onto the gang, his body completely still. Cristiano Ronaldo. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the man with the scar laughed, though it was thinner now, edged with uncertainty. Look at this, he said, nudging his friend. The legend himself. What, you want an autograph? Ronaldo didn't blink. He took a single step forward. I said, pick it up. His voice was still calm. But there was no mistaking the warning underneath it. Scar's smirk faltered. His friend, the broader one, shifted uncomfortably. "Man, let's just go," the smaller one muttered. Scar turned on him, hissing under his breath. "Are you kidding? He's just one guy." Ronaldo took another step forward. There was no hesitation in his movements. No anger. Just certainty. Scar's fingers twitched at his sides. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us what to do?" His voice was louder now, desperate to regain control. Ronaldo's expression didn't change. But his eyes. His eyes held something that made Scar freeze. Then, slowly, deliberately, Ronaldo tilted his head, just slightly. A silent challenge. Scar's breath hitched. Because he realized something too late. Ronaldo wasn't asking. The air thickened. The moment stretched. Then, Scar moved. Not forward. Backward. Just an inch. Just enough. And that was it. That was the end of it. The moment he had stepped away, he had already lost. Scar knew it. And so did Ronaldo. The tension broke. Without another word, Scar bent down and picked up the photograph. His fingers trembled as he placed the torn pieces back on the ground in front of Maria. Maria's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. She looked up at Ronaldo, her lips parting, but he was still watching them. Not her. Them. Scar swallowed hard, looking at his crew. "We're done here," he muttered. Then, just like that, they were gone. The moment their footsteps faded into the distance, Maria let out a shaky breath. She turned to Ronaldo, still stunned, her heart pounding in her chest. He was already bending down, carefully gathering the torn pieces of the photograph. His fingers, strong but gentle, pressed them together, smoothing the edges as if somehow willing them to mend. Then, without a word, he handed them to her. Maria stared at him, her old eyes wide, searching. I don't understand," she whispered. Ronaldo's voice was quieter now, softer. "No one should go through that alone." Maria felt something crack inside her. Not from fear. But from the weight of being seen. Her lips trembled. They took everything. Ronaldo's gaze darkened. "No," he said, his voice like stone. "They haven't." Maria held her breath. Because there was something in his eyes now, a promise. And somehow, she knew. This wasn't over yet. Maria's fingers trembled as she clutched the torn pieces of the photograph. She could feel the rough edges where it had been ripped, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. She looked up at Ronaldo, his expression unreadable, yet his presence immovable. He stood tall, his dark eyes scanning the empty street as if making sure the men were truly gone. But there was something else in his gaze, something that told her this wasn't finished. Maria swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. You shouldn't have done that." Ronaldo's head tilted slightly, his gaze dropping back to her. "Why?" She let out a shaky breath. "Because they're dangerous." A beat of silence. Then, his jaw tightened. "So am I." Maria's breath hitched. There was no bravado in his voice, no empty threat. Just certainty. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the football legend she had seen on television screens. The man the world adored. The man people worship for his talent, his discipline, his victories. But this wasn't the Ronaldo they knew. This was something else. Something colder. Something that told her those men had made a mistake. She hesitated. "They took everything. My money, my keys," her voice cracked. "My husband's ring." Ronaldo's entire body went still. Her fingers curled around the photograph, her knuckles white. "It was the only thing I had left of him. She could barely say the words without her voice breaking. The thought of it, of never holding that ring again, of losing that final, physical piece of the man she had loved, felt like a second death. For a long moment, Ronaldo said nothing. Then, slowly, he exhaled. "They're still in the city," he said, more to himself than to her. Maria frowned. "How do you know?" He met her gaze. "Because men like that." His voice was calm, but the steel underneath it was unmistakable. "They don't run. They don't think they have to." Maria shuddered. Ronaldo turned, his posture shifting, his body coiled with silent energy. "Wait," she stammered, grabbing his sleeve with her frail fingers. "Where are you going?" Ronaldo glanced down at her hand, his gaze softening just slightly. "To get your ring back." Her heart stopped. "No," she said quickly. "You don't have to." His eyes darkened. "I do." Maria felt something shift in the air. There was no stopping him. No reasoning with whatever force had taken root inside of him. He was already gone, even as he stood before her. And before she could say anything else, he turned and walked away. Ronaldo's footsteps were steady, his breath controlled. His mind was not on football. Not on contracts, endorsements, or the millions of people who followed his every move. Right now, there was only one goal. Find them. And make them remember his name. The streets of Lisbon were different at night. The energy of the city faded into something darker, quieter, filled with shadows and whispered conversations. But Ronaldo knew how to read people. He knew how to see patterns. They were cocky. They had laughed as they tore apart an old woman's belongings. They wouldn't be hiding. They would be celebrating. And that meant they had to be somewhere close. He moved through the streets, his sharp eyes scanning every alley, every corner. He ignored the passing glances from pedestrians who recognized him but were too intimidated to approach. They could sense it. The energy around him. Ronaldo wasn't just walking. He was hunting. And then he found them. A dimly lit bar at the edge of the district. A place that thrived on anonymity, where men like them went to spend stolen money, to drink away their guilt. Ronaldo's jaw clenched as he stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and cheap cologne. His eyes locked onto them immediately. The three men sat in the far corner, their stolen cash scattered across the table, laughing over drinks like they had already forgotten what they had done. The man with the scar, the leader, was fidgeting with something between his fingers. A gold ring. Maria's ring. Ronaldo's entire body went rigid. The laughter at the table continued, oblivious. Then Ronaldo moved. His approach was silent. Calculated. By the time Scar noticed him, it was too late. A hand slammed down on the table, hard, rattling the glasses, scattering the money. The laughter died instantly. The men froze. Slowly, Scar looked up. And when his eyes met Ronaldo's, all the color drained from his face. The room went still. No one spoke. No one breathed. Ronaldo's voice was low, unshakable. "The ring." Scar tried to play it off, tried to hide the nervous twitch in his fingers. "What ring?" he muttered. Ronaldo's gaze did not waver. "I won't ask twice." A tense beat passed. Then, Ronaldo moved. It was fast. Precise. 1 second, Scar was gripping the ring. The next, his wrist was pinned to the table, Ronaldo's grip like iron. The glass on the table tipped over, spilling beer across the stolen bills. Scar let out a strangled gasp, his free hand instinctively reaching for Ronaldo's arm. It didn't budge. Ronaldo tightened his hold, his fingers digging just slightly into the pressure points. Scar's eyes widened in pain. "The ring," Ronaldo repeated. This time, there was no question. No room for negotiation. Scar swallowed hard. His breathing was ragged, his confidence shattered. Without another word, he opened his hand. The gold ring dropped onto the table with a soft clink. Ronaldo let go of his wrist. Scar pulled back immediately, clutching his arm, eyes darting to his crew for help. But his men were frozen in place, refusing to meet his gaze. Because they knew. They had already lost. Ronaldo picked up the ring, turning it over in his fingers. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his expression unreadable. Then, without another glance at the men, he turned and walked away. Maria sat on the same bench where Ronaldo had left her, her frail hands folded in her lap, her heart heavy with worry. She had told herself to go home, to forget what had happened, to accept that some things were gone forever. But she couldn't move. She couldn't leave without knowing. And then she heard the footsteps. Her breath caught. She turned. And there he was. Ronaldo stood before her, silent, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Maria gasped. Her husband's ring sat in his palm, untouched, unbroken. Tears welled in her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, taking it as gently as if it were made of glass. Her voice broke. How? Ronaldo just watched her. No one takes from you again, he said simply. Maria felt her breath hitch. Because she believed him. She had never believed in miracles. But maybe, just maybe, one had found her that night. And his name was Cristiano Ronaldo. Maria clutched the ring in her trembling hands, holding it as if she feared it would disappear. Tears welled in her tired eyes, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest, leaving her unable to speak. Ronaldo watched her carefully, his expression unreadable, his presence steady. He had faced countless defenders, thousands of roaring stadiums, the pressure of millions expecting greatness from him, but this moment? This was something different. Maria's lips trembled as she finally found her voice. I don't understand. Ronaldo's gaze dropped to the ring in her hands, the golden band catching the faint glow of the streetlights. It belongs to you, he said simply. That's all that matters. Maria swallowed hard, blinking away tears. You went after them, didn't you? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back slightly, his dark eyes studying her face. They won't bother you again, he finally said. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. Maria believed him. She looked down at the ring, running her thumb gently over its surface, as if trying to feel the warmth of her husband's touch within it. Then, she looked back up at Ronaldo. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Ronaldo exhaled softly, his posture relaxing slightly. You don't have to. Maria let out a soft, breathless laugh, shaking her head. Men like you don't just appear for people like me. Ronaldo smirked slightly. Maybe more of us should. Maria's heart clenched. Because he meant it. There was no arrogance in his words. No need for praise. Just a simple truth, that he had been there, that he had seen, and that he had chosen not to look away. She wiped at her eyes, forcing herself to take a steady breath. I should go home, she murmured. It's late. Ronaldo nodded. I'll walk you. Maria hesitated. You don't have to. I know. And just like that, it was settled. She smiled, shaking her head, and turned toward the familiar path that led back to her small apartment. Ronaldo walked beside her, his steps quiet but certain, his presence an unspoken shield against the world. The streets, once filled with shadows and fear, felt different now. Safer. As they walked, Maria stole a glance at him. You remind me of my husband, you know. Ronaldo raised an eyebrow, amused. Oh. She nodded, gripping her purse tightly. He never let people walk alone either. A small, knowing smile played on Ronaldo's lips. Smart man. Maria chuckled softly. He was. For a long moment, they walked in comfortable silence. The city buzzed around them, cars rolling by, the distant hum of music from nearby cafes filling the air. Then, as they reached the front of Maria's apartment building, she stopped. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. I wish there were more people like you, she said quietly. Ronaldo studied her for a long moment. Then, he reached into his pocket. Maria watched as he pulled something small out, his fingers brushing over it before carefully extending it to her. A medal. A simple one. Not a trophy, not a championship title. But one that had meant something to him. Maria frowned. What is this? Ronaldo smirked slightly. A reminder. Maria hesitated before taking it, feeling the cool weight of it in her palm. She looked up at him, her heart full. You've given me too much already, she whispered. Ronaldo shook his head. Not enough. Her lips trembled. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Truly seen. She reached out, placing her frail hand over his. Obrigado, menino. Ronaldo's expression softened. He nodded. And then, just as quietly as he had arrived, he was gone. Maria stood there for a long time, watching the empty street, clutching both the ring and the medal close to her heart. She had never believed in miracles. But maybe, just maybe, one had found her that night. And his name was Cristiano Ronaldo. Maria stood at the entrance of her small apartment building long after Ronaldo had disappeared down the quiet street. The city still hummed around her, but for the first time in a long while, she felt as though she was in a world that noticed her again. Her fingers curled tightly around the ring and the medal, both precious in different ways. One was a piece of her past, the last connection to the man she had loved and lost. The other, a reminder that kindness still existed. That people still cared. She took a slow, steady breath before finally stepping inside. The stairwell was dimly lit, the scent of old wood and the faint aroma of baked bread from the downstairs bakery filling the air. She climbed each step carefully, her knees aching with each movement. As she reached her door, she paused, glancing at the medal in her hand again. She traced its edges with her thumb, a small smile forming on her lips. A reminder, he had said. Maria had spent so many years shrinking into the background, becoming just another old woman in a world that had moved on without her. But tonight, she had been reminded that she mattered. She pushed the door open, stepping inside her tiny but familiar apartment. The space was filled with memories, old photographs, worn furniture, small keepsakes from a life that had once been fuller. She walked over to her small kitchen table, carefully setting the medal down beside her husband's photograph. Her eyes drifted to the torn edges of the picture. She swallowed hard. They had ripped it apart, as if it were worthless. As if he was worthless. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the pieces, pressing them together, smoothing the edges as if she could will them whole again. But some things couldn't be repaired. Or so she thought. Because suddenly, her fingers brushed over something else. Her husband's ring. Whole. Unbroken. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of emotion crashing over her. She lifted it to her lips, pressing a soft kiss against the cool metal, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. For years, she had thought she was alone. That the world had forgotten about her. That no one would come. But tonight, a man had proved her wrong. And that meant something. Maybe, it meant everything. Maria exhaled a deep, shaky breath, her heart full as she placed the ring gently next to the photograph. And then, she smiled. A real smile. The first she had felt in a very, very long time. The next morning, the world continued as if nothing had happened. The sun rose over Lisbon, spilling golden light onto the streets, warming the sidewalks where people bustled about, carrying on with their daily lives. Maria woke to the scent of fresh bread from the bakery below. She sat up slowly, her body still sore from the night before, but her heart was light. She made herself a small cup of coffee, standing by the window as she sipped it, letting the morning sounds of the city wash over her. It felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. She stepped out of her apartment for the first time in a long time without feeling invisible. She walked to the market, as she always did, but today, when she passed the young woman selling flowers, she paused. The girl, startled, looked up at her. "Bom dia, senora," she greeted politely. Maria's eyes drifted over the small bouquets, her gaze landing on a delicate arrangement of white lilies. She hadn't bought flowers in years. But today, she wanted to. She pointed at the bouquet, pulling a few euros from her purse. The girl smiled, wrapping the flowers carefully before handing them over. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Maria nodded. "Yes. They are." As she walked home, she held her head a little higher. She wasn't just another old woman on the street anymore. She was Maria. And she had a story to tell. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, the white lilies placed carefully in a small vase. She reached for the metal, running her fingers over it once more. She thought about Cristiano Ronaldo. About how the world only saw him as a footballer, as a legend, as a man of trophies and victories. But they didn't know. They didn't know the man who had walked into the night to fight for an old woman's dignity. They didn't know the man who had stopped when no one else had. She smiled softly. One day, she thought, she would tell someone. Maybe the children who played football in the alley below. Maybe the boy at the bakery who always looked up to Ronaldo with admiration. She would tell them who he really was. Not just the man who scored goals. Not just the man who broke records. But the man who saved a stranger. Maria exhaled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't afraid anymore. Because she knew. As long as there were people like him in the world, she would never truly be alone.